Harold and Miriam Voss believed their 30-day stay at Meadow Ridge Assisted Living was temporary. Harold was recovering from pneumonia, and their children promised they would be home before the first hard frost. On the 29th day, their oldest daughter arrived carrying a leather folder instead of their coats. The house was empty. Their dining table had been sold. Harold's tools were gone. Miriam's cedar chest had been donated. The locks had been changed, and a real estate sign stood in the yard of the home they had paid for over 43 years. "You'll be safer here," Elaine said. "We've handled everything." Harold was 81. Miriam was 78. They had raised 3 children, survived layoffs and illness, and never missed a mortgage payment. Yet their family had reduced an entire life to receipts, boxes, and decisions made without them. Miriam refused to sign the final sale papers. With nowhere else to go, the couple used the last $8 Miriam had hidden behind an expired library card to buy the abandoned municipal steam laundry, a soot-black building filled with cracked pipes, rusted boilers, and sorting cages no one had opened in decades. The town laughed. Their children called the purchase proof that they could no longer manage their own lives. Then Miriam found a single brass tag hidden inside an iron return chute. It was stamped 417 and linked to pension deductions that had vanished decades earlier. And one signature belonged to the man who had helped their children take everything away. Before we go back to the life Harold and Miriam built, and the moment their children began deciding what was best for them, consider this. Growing older should never mean surrendering the right to choose. If you believe dignity has no expiration date, stay with their story, and subscribe so more forgotten voices can be heard. For 43 years, the small house on Alder Street had answered to the habits of Harold and Miriam Voss. At 6 each morning, Harold crossed the kitchen in wool socks and placed the kettle on the same burner. Miriam opened the curtains above the sink, checked the weather, and marked the day's appointments on a paper calendar. Their life was not grand, but nearly everything inside the house carried the mark of work done carefully and kept for a reason. Harold had spent 34 years maintaining boilers for schools, hospitals, and county buildings. He never described himself as an engineer. He said he was the man people called when a room went cold and no one knew why. He could stand beside a wall of pipes, listen to the knocking inside them, and tell whether the trouble came from trapped air, a failing valve, or a strained pump. He believed machines warned people before they failed. The problem, he often said, was that most people waited for silence or smoke before they listened. Miriam understood systems of another kind. She worked in the municipal payroll office, where hundreds of workers depended on numbers being entered correctly. She remembered employee codes, overtime rules, deductions, and the exceptions that vanished inside larger totals. A missing $20 mattered because it might mean medicine or groceries to someone else. During the final years of the city steam laundry, she noticed that several workers had retirement deductions taken from their wages, even though their names did not appear on the permanent employee list. One code stayed in her memory, 417. When she questioned the discrepancy, a supervisor told her the records had been transferred to the county pension board and were no longer her concern. Miriam corrected what she could and kept working. She had 3 children at home and no savings large enough to risk losing her job over a file no one else wanted opened. Their children grew up around service calls and payroll deadlines. Elaine, the oldest, liked order and disliked uncertainty. David avoided arguments by agreeing with whoever spoke most confidently. Susan, the youngest, asked difficult questions but often retreated when the answers threatened family peace. Harold built the dining table after Elaine was born because they could not afford one from a store. Over the years, its surface collected homework scratches, candle wax, and a dark ring from one Thanksgiving. Miriam measured each child's height on the kitchen doorway, adding dates in pencil beside the lines. When Elaine was accepted into college, Harold and Miriam borrowed against their car to pay the first semester. When David lost his job, they covered his rent without telling his sisters. When Susan's marriage ended, Miriam turned the sewing room back into a bedroom before Susan asked. They rarely called these things sacrifices. To them, this was what parents did. Thomas Mercer entered the family when Elaine was 30. He was polished, attentive, and unusually interested in how institutions worked. He began in the county pension office and rose into compliance, where his job was to certify that procedures had been followed. Harold respected his confidence. Miriam respected documents more than confidence. But for years, Thomas gave her no reason to distrust him. Age arrived gradually. Harold took longer to climb a ladder and stopped accepting repair jobs that required crawling beneath buildings. Miriam used stronger reading glasses, though she still balanced their accounts to the cent each month. They paid off the Alder Street mortgage and kept the stamped final receipt in a fireproof box. Their pensions covered the bills. Their medical appointments were written down. Their pantry was full. They had discussed installing another handrail near the basement steps, but neither had discussed leaving the house. Then Harold developed pneumonia after repairing a neighbor's furnace during freezing rain. For 3 days, he insisted it was only a cold. On the 4th, Miriam found him seated on the basement stairs, unable to catch enough breath to stand. At the hospital, oxygen tubing replaced the pencil he usually kept behind one ear. Elaine arrived first, followed by Thomas carrying a legal pad. The doctor said Harold was improving, but he would need rest and monitoring for several weeks. Miriam expected the family to discuss meal deliveries, home nursing visits, and temporary help with the stairs. Instead, Thomas asked where they kept their insurance records, which account paid the utilities, and whether Miriam had considered allowing someone else to handle the monthly bills. He asked each question gently. That gentleness was why Harold did not recognize the danger. Miriam did. The plan was presented as a kindness. Elaine stood beside Harold's hospital bed with a brochure for Meadow Ridge Assisted Living, folded open to a photograph of a sunlit dining room. The place offered respiratory monitoring, physical therapy, and what she called a chance for Mom to rest without worrying every time Dad coughs. 30 days, she said. Then we reassess. Miriam disliked that word. It suggested someone else had claimed the right to decide what came next. Still, Harold's doctor agreed that supervised recovery could help. Miriam had slept in a vinyl chair for 4 nights, and Thomas said insurance would cover most of the first month. The proposal began to sound like a practical bridge home. Harold agreed because he believed recovery should be measured by what he could do again, not by how frightened his children had become. The papers arrived on a clipboard. Most concerned medication and emergency contacts. Near the bottom sat a separate authorization allowing Thomas to pay medical bills from the Voss's checking account while Harold recovered. Miriam read it twice. This is limited to hospital and care expenses. Exactly, Thomas replied. It keeps late fees from piling up. She crossed out a sentence referring broadly to related financial obligations, initialed the margin, and made Thomas initial beside her. Then she photographed every page with Susan's phone. Thomas smiled. Still the payroll clerk. Still reading before I sign, Miriam said. Meadow Ridge was clean, warm, and quieter than the hospital. Their room had 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking an empty fountain. The physical therapist walked with Harold twice a day. By the end of the first week, he could cross the hall without stopping. The trouble did not begin with cruelty. It began with convenience. Elaine brought clothes and said she had collected the mail. David mentioned changing the furnace filter at Alder Street. Thomas arranged automatic payments so Miriam would not need to think about utilities. Each act sounded helpful alone. Then, Miriam tried to check their balance. Her password no longer worked. Thomas said the bank had reset access after unusual login attempts. He promised new information the next day. He did not bring it. 2 days later, the electric company told Miriam the billing contact had changed. When she asked who authorized it, the representative said she must complete an identity review. That evening, Thomas arrived with another form. He called it routine bank verification. Miriam saw language granting him authority over recurring expenses, insurance matters, and property maintenance. This is not what I signed at the hospital. It's the updated version the bank requires. Then the bank can explain it to me. Thomas returned the paper to his briefcase. Nobody is taking anything from you. We are reducing stress. Harold watched the clasp close. He knew the sound of pressure building inside a sealed system. It rarely began with a burst. It began with one valve tightened farther than necessary. During the second week, Harold asked David to drive them home for an afternoon. He wanted to inspect the basement rail and furnace. David looked toward Elaine before answering. The house is a mess. We're clearing pathways. What pathways? Miriam asked. Rugs, extra chairs, things you could trip over. Miriam reminded him that no one had permission to remove anything. David rubbed the edge of his cup and said they were only making the place safer. The next morning, Their home number was no longer in service. Elaine explained that Thomas had changed the phone plan. When Miriam requested the new number, Elaine changed the subject to Harold's oxygen levels. Susan visited less often, but she brought no forms. On the 18th day, she sat beside Miriam in the courtyard and admitted Elaine had asked her to help sort belongings. What does sorting mean? Susan looked at the dry fountain. Removing clutter. Whose word was that? Susan did not answer. Miriam asked whether the fireproof box remained in the hall closet. Susan said she had not seen it. She insisted their parents were coming home, but the assurance sounded borrowed. That afternoon, Miriam asked Meadow Ridge's administrator whether she and Harold were free to leave. Of course. This is not a locked facility. Has anyone said we cannot make our own decisions? The administrator opened their file and found a note from Thomas requesting that all discharge discussions include him because the family had concerns regarding judgment and financial vulnerability. Miriam requested a copy. Harold read it, placed it beside his inhaler, and said, "He is building a record." From then on, they kept their own. Miriam documented every changed account, unanswered question, and unexplained form. Harold recorded his therapy sessions, walking distance, and oxygen readings. When a loose handrail shifted beneath another resident's weight, he showed maintenance where the wall anchor had failed. It was repaired before dinner. The staff began speaking to him as a man regaining strength, not as a patient losing competence. On day 24, Miriam remembered Nora Whitfield, an attorney who had once represented a sanitation worker whose overtime was miscalculated. She found Nora's number through directory assistance. After hearing the outline, Nora asked, "Have either of you signed a deed, a listing agreement, or a durable power of attorney?" "No." "Then sign nothing until I see it." The warning arrived almost too late. On the 29th day, Elaine entered their room carrying a leather folder. She did not bring the coats Miriam had requested. Inside was a proposed sale agreement for Alder Street. Elaine explained that maintaining the house no longer made sense. The rooms had been cleared for photographs, some belongings were gone, and a buyer was interested. The money, she said, would secure excellent long-term care. Harold turned to the final page. His name and Miriam's were marked with yellow tabs. "You listed a house you do not own," Miriam said. "We're protecting what you built," Elaine replied, "before an emergency forces a worse decision." Thomas arrived and said the family had consulted professionals. Harold's illness had revealed risks everyone had ignored. Waiting, he warned, would reduce the property's value. Miriam asked what authority allowed them to prepare the sale. Thomas referred to the hospital authorization. She opened the photographs Susan had taken and read the limited language aloud. Medical bills, temporary care expenses, nothing more. A tightness appeared around Thomas's mouth. "The sale cannot proceed without both signatures," Miriam said. "You do not have them." Elaine's anger surfaced. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" Harold rose without assistance. His knees trembled, but his voice did not. "Somewhere, our permission still matters." They had stopped the sale for the moment. They had not yet found a way home. Nora Whitfield arrived at Meadow Ridge the next morning, wearing a raincoat the color of wet stone and carrying a canvas briefcase older than Susan. She did not begin by asking what their children had done. She asked what Harold and Miriam wanted. "To leave," Harold said. "To leave without being treated as if we are running away," Miriam added. Nora reviewed the hospital authorization, the proposed sale agreement, and the note Thomas had placed in their file. The document allowed him to pay specific medical and care expenses. It did not authorize him to sell property, change ownership, or decide where they lived. "Your family may argue that you are making unsafe choices," Nora said, "but disagreement is not incapacity." She asked Harold the date, his physician's name, and why he had entered Meadow Ridge. She asked Miriam to explain the difference between their checking and pension accounts. Neither question troubled them. By noon, the administrator had prepared discharge papers. Meadow Ridge could recommend continued care, but it could not hold competent adults against their wishes. Leaving was legally simple. Finding somewhere to go was not. Nora offered to arrange a motel. Susan offered her spare room, though she could not promise Elaine would stay away. Harold refused to enter another house where one of his children might decide what he signed or whom he saw. Miriam understood. She also knew pride could become another trap. "We need a door that locks from our side," she told Nora. "It does not have to be pretty. They spent that night in a roadside motel beside the interstate. Trucks changed gears beyond the curtains. Harold arranged his medication on the nightstand while Miriam opened the county newspaper Nora had left behind. Apartments required deposits they could not access while Thomas controlled the online account. Short-term rentals cost more than a month at Meadow Ridge. Near the back, beneath notices for seized vehicles and unpaid storage units, Miriam found a list titled County Tax Foreclosure Auction. One description caught her attention: former municipal steam laundry, closed 32 years, sold as is. Buyer assumes cleanup, code compliance, and future liability. Opening bid, $1. Harold read it twice. I worked there, not at the laundry. On the boilers. County maintenance sent me every winter until they closed. He remembered a long brick building near the freight spur, with a smokestack visible from 3 roads. It had washed hospital sheets, hotel linens, factory uniforms, and work clothes for municipal crews. The main boiler was old even then, but built thicker than most modern units. Miriam remembered payroll envelopes arriving from the laundry in gray canvas bags and deductions that never matched the permanent employee roster. Neither mentioned the number 417. Not yet. Nora was less sentimental when they showed her the notice. The purchase price is not the cost, she warned. Repairs, insurance, utilities, environmental testing, this could consume money you do not control. We are not planning to run every machine, Harold said. You may not be allowed to live there. Then we make one room legal before winter. Nora studied them. You have the right to make a bad investment. Miriam folded the notice. That is more right than our children intended to leave us. The auction took place 2 days later in a fluorescent-lit room at the county administration building. Most bidders were contractors or scrap dealers. Harold wore the jacket he had left the hospital in. Miriam carried $8 she had withdrawn months earlier and hidden behind an expired library card. It was the only cash their children had not accounted for. The steam laundry appeared near the end. The clerk described broken windows, inactive utilities, an unresolved roof citation, and possible asbestos in pipe insulation. A scrap dealer offered $1. Another man bid $3. A representative from Crosswell Redevelopment raised the price to $5. Harold noticed the representative did not inspect the condition report. He already knew what he wanted. At $7, the room quieted. Miriam touched Harold's sleeve. $8, he said. The clerk waited. The Crosswell representative looked toward the rear door, then lowered his paddle. Sold. A few people laughed with the disbelief reserved for someone buying a problem no sensible person wanted. The clerk handed Miriam a packet thick with warnings and thin on promises. Then the rear door opened. Elaine entered with Thomas behind her. Elaine looked from her parents to the deed packet. Tell me you didn't. Thomas took the property description from the clerk's table. His eyes moved quickly over the parcel number, easements, and demolition notice. This building is condemned. It has violations, Miriam replied. That is not the same thing. You cannot live there. You cannot insure it. You cannot afford to repair it. His concern no longer sounded measured. He asked whether the bid could be voided, whether the clerk knew of Harold's illness, and whether a competency review was required. The clerk said the buyers had provided identification, understood the conditions, and paid in full. $8 lay on the table between them. Thomas turned to Nora. You allowed this? I confirmed their right to decide, she said. Elaine called the purchase humiliating. She said people would think the family had abandoned them. Miriam met her eyes. People will think whatever is easiest. We know what happened. Outside, cold rain stippled the courthouse steps. Nora drove them to the property before dusk. The municipal steam laundry stood beyond a chain-link fence at the edge of an old industrial district. Its brick walls were blackened by soot. Several windows had been boarded. Weeds pushed through cracks in the loading yard, and the smokestack leaned slightly against the gray sky. Harold unlocked the gate. Inside, the air smelled of wet plaster, iron, and old soap. Their flashlight beams crossed silent presses, suspended rails, and rows of sorting cages. The place was colder than the parking lot. Yet Harold paused beside the main water line and rested 2 fingers against it. There is pressure. A faint tremor moved through the metal. Miriam found an office with an intact door, a small washroom, and a worker's break room that could be closed off from the machinery. The roof leaked in 3 places, but not there. It was not a home. It was a beginning. Near the entrance, she saw a white planning notice fastened to the fence. Crosswell Redevelopment had applied to acquire surrounding parcels for luxury apartments. At the bottom was the project's compliance consultant, Thomas Mercer. Miriam read the name once, then called Harold over. Thomas had not been horrified because they had bought a ruin. He had been horrified because they had bought this one. The first thing Harold did was close the door behind them, not because the building felt safe, but because for the first time in weeks, the key was in his hand. The front office became their base. Its ceiling sagged in one corner, but the floor was dry, the inner door latched, and a narrow window faced the loading yard. Miriam swept broken glass into a metal dustpan while Harold walked the perimeter with a flashlight, chalk, and red cord. He tied the cord across every doorway he considered unsafe. The boiler room received 2 cords. The western pressing floor received 3. He did not touch a valve. The main boiler was coated in dust and flaking paint, but its shell showed no obvious collapse. Several gauges had been removed. A copper line had been cut cleanly rather than torn out for scrap. Whoever stripped the building had known which parts mattered. "Can it work?" Miriam asked. "Eventually. Maybe. Can it keep us warm tonight?" "No." Experience had taught Harold that desperation was most dangerous when it dressed itself as confidence. Before any flame touched that system, he needed to isolate the branches, test the pressure relief, inspect the stack, and learn what remained inside the feed line. They would be cold before they would be careless. The workers' break room offered better shelter than the office. It had 2 interior walls and fewer broken windows. Harold covered the outer opening with plywood found near the loading dock. Miriam blocked the bottom of the door with rolled towels Nora had bought from a discount store. Nora returned before dark with sleeping bags, lanterns, bottled water, canned soup, and a portable carbon monoxide detector. She also brought the recorded deed. "Crosswell asked about the parcel this afternoon," she said. "Not a legal challenge. Someone wanted to know how quickly a tax sale could be reconsidered." "Thomas?" Miriam asked. The request came through the company's attorney. Harold placed the deed inside a metal cash box and slid it beneath the office desk. Their old house had contained 43 years of proof that they belonged there. In the laundry, belonging fit inside one locked box. They ate soup warmed on a camping stove near the open loading door. Harold kept the flame far from dust, fabric, and chemical residue. When darkness filled the high windows, the building began making noises. Metal clicked as the temperature dropped. A loose panel knocked above the pressing floor. Water moved inside a pipe with a slow pulse. "Does that sound wrong?" Miriam asked. "Most of it sounds old." "That is not the same answer." "No," Harold admitted, "it isn't." He traced the water noise to a service line entering through the north wall. The city valve outside had never been fully closed. The pressure was weak but steady. He shut the branches to the machines, opened a low drain, and watched black water spill into a bucket. The first bucket resembled ink. The second carried flakes of rust. By the 6th, the water ran the color of weak tea. Harold did not call it clean. He called it progress. They still used bottled water, but the line meant the building was not entirely dead. That night, Miriam slept in short pieces. Each time she woke, she listened for Harold's breathing. At Meadow Ridge, she had listened for footsteps and the click of someone entering with another form. Here, the sounds were harsher but honest. Pipes contracted. Rain tapped the plywood. Wind moved beneath the loading doors. No one came in without permission. Near dawn, Harold's cough deepened. Miriam sat up, but he raised one hand and reached for his inhaler. The spell passed after several minutes. "You cannot prove anything by collapsing here," she said. "I know. Knowing is not the same as stopping." He looked toward the doorway marked by red cord. "Then we make a list before we make a move." By morning, Miriam had divided a legal pad into 4 columns: shelter, water, heat, and evidence. Evidence meant photographs of every room, copies of the deed, receipts, code notices, and a record of every visitor. She had spent a career learning that memory was strongest when paper stood beside it. Nora arranged for a building inspector she trusted to perform a preliminary walkthrough. He identified asbestos wrapping in isolated sections, a failed electrical panel, and 2 unsafe roof areas. He also confirmed that the office, break room, and washroom could potentially be separated from the industrial floor and brought to basic code. The news was neither rescue nor disaster. It was a path. A hardware store owner named Caleb Dunn delivered plywood, gloves, plastic sheeting, and a used kerosene heater rated for ventilated construction spaces. He remembered Harold repairing the elementary school's heating system during an ice storm. "You kept 80 children from being sent home," Caleb said. "Pay me when you can." Harold accepted the materials, but refused to use the heater until he had cleared a ventilated area and tested the detector twice. Miriam cleaned the front office while he worked. She found damp time cards, empty detergent tins, and a wall calendar stopped in March 32 years earlier. Behind a cabinet stood a row of iron sorting cages. One cage would not slide open. Its track was jammed beneath the floor lip, and the back panel leaned forward, as though something had fallen behind it. Harold studied the bolts. "This was moved after it was anchored. How can you tell?" The rear feet scraped the concrete. "Somebody pulled it out, then shoved it back crooked. They used a pry bar and wooden blocks, shifting the weight inches at a time," Harold directed. Miriam watched the floor and called out whenever the frame twisted. The cage finally rolled forward with a shriek that crossed the empty laundry. Behind it lay an iron return chute descending from the upper sorting platform. A seam along one side had been fastened with screws newer than the surrounding metal. Harold removed them carefully. No money or ledger waited inside. A single brass tag slid down the chute and struck the concrete near Miriam's shoe. It was oval, darkened with age, and stamped with 3 numbers. 427. A strip of faded blue cloth remained looped through the hole. Miriam crouched without touching it. The code drew up a memory she had spent decades refusing to revisit. A payroll sheet, a retirement deduction, and a supervisor telling her the matter belonged to someone else. Harold photographed the tag where it had fallen. Only then did Miriam lift it. On the reverse, scratched faintly by hand, were 2 letters. EC. They searched the chute with a flashlight, but found only lint hardened into gray ropes. Whatever had once been hidden, there had been removed or had fallen deeper into the system. They sealed the tag in a clear bag and recorded the time and location. Later, while mapping the safe corridor, Harold stopped at a steel door beside the old accounting office. Its lock had rusted, but the real obstruction ran along the hinge side. A bead of weld extended from the upper bracket to the floor. The door had not been secured to keep intruders out. It had been sealed so no one inside the building could open it again. Harold touched the metal with one gloved finger. Miriam held the bag containing 417 toward the light. For the first time since buying the laundry, neither was thinking about where they would sleep. They were thinking about what someone had worked so hard to leave buried. Harold refused to cut through the welded door until Nora had photographed every inch of it. The bead along the hinges was rough, laid down by someone working quickly. Rust covered the edges, but the weld itself was newer than the original frame. Nora recorded the corridor, the door, and the bag holding tag 417. Then she requested every county closure report connected to the laundry. "If this becomes evidence," Miriam said, "I want no one saying we changed what we found." Caleb lent them a portable grinder. Harold used it only on the welded hinge brackets and left the lock untouched. Sparks fell onto a fireproof blanket while Miriam stood nearby with an extinguisher. They stopped often to check the metal, the air, and Harold's breathing. The door opened inward after 40 minutes. The room beyond was smaller than Miriam expected. There were no safes or walls of secret files. A steel desk faced 2 rows of dented cabinets. Wooden cubbies covered one wall. Several paper bundles had collapsed into damp layers on the floor. What remained looked ordinary enough to disappoint anyone searching for treasure. Miriam knew ordinary records could ruin powerful lies. She entered only after Nora photographed the room. On the desk sat a hand-cranked timestamp and a wooden tray divided into numbered slots. Slot 417 was empty. The numbers continued beyond 600. Miriam placed the brass tag beside the matching space. The shape fit perfectly. "These were not just clothing claims," she said. "They were worker identifiers." Harold pointed to the cubbies. Some still held fragments of fabric, bent tags, and envelopes fused by moisture. Miriam reconstructed the process. A worker turned in a uniform or protective garment at the end of a shift. The brass tag followed it through sorting, washing, drying, and return. The same number also appeared on shift bundles and service records, allowing the laundry to count work without writing names on material moving through steam and water. The system had been built for efficiency. Someone had later used it for concealment. They separated dry paper from material too fragile to touch. Miriam found weekly sheets listing tag ranges beside letters for employers. H for the hospital, C for county crews, and G for the Grandwell Hotel. Permanent employees were written by name. Supplemental laborers appeared only by tag number. Harold found boiler logbooks in a lower cabinet. Every shift recorded ignition time, fuel delivered, pressure levels, water treatment, and shutdown. To Miriam, the figures were mechanical details. To Harold, they described the building's pulse. During winter, the boiler ran 2 shifts on weekdays and 1 on Sundays. In summer, it operated nearly as long because hospital linen volume increased. Fuel use dipped during holidays, but never long enough to suggest seasonal labor. The county claimed most of these people worked only when demand rose, Miriam said. This demand never stopped. Harold compared the fuel totals with maintenance reports for the washers, presses, and dryers. Even allowing for waste, the consumption meant multiple production lines operated most of the year. A small permanent staff could not have processed that volume. Miriam searched the weekly sheets again. The same supplemental tag ranges appeared in January, April, August, and November. Numbers 401 through 438 returned in every season. They called them temporary, she said, but kept them working all year. That distinction mattered. Temporary laborers did not qualify for employer pension contributions. Permanent employees did. If workers were deliberately misclassified, the county could avoid matching contributions while still deducting retirement money from their wages. Miriam found carbon copies of payroll summaries in the bottom drawer. A narrow column labeled RET showed small deductions beside tag numbers rather than names. Tag 417 had a retirement deduction in 19 consecutive pay periods. On the 20th, the number disappeared. Could the worker have left? Nora asked. Possibly, Miriam said. We still need a person or another record. She would not allow suspicion to become proof merely because it fit. Harold then located a metal document tube behind the bottom cabinet. It held transfer summaries prepared when the laundry closed. These listed pension deductions meant to be sent to the county board for reconciliation. The totals did not match the surviving payroll sheets. The gap was too large to be rounding and too consistent to be accidental. One transfer page carried a note, supplemental accounts, status unverified, hold for final review. The date was 17 years after the laundry closed. The next page explained why. It certified that all eligible deductions had been reconciled, all unresolved balances transferred to a general reserve, and no individual claims remained outstanding. The document carried 2 signatures. The first belonged to a deceased county finance director. The second was Thomas Mercer's. At the time, Thomas had been a junior compliance officer. Harold read the page twice. Did he take the money? We do not know, Miriam said. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers. The scheme, if there was one, likely began before Thomas joined the pension office. Workers had been misclassified for years. He might not have created it, but his signature certified that the missing accounts had been resolved. He had closed the door on them. Nora warned that a signature alone would not prove intent. Thomas could claim he relied on reports prepared by others. The records were fragments, not yet a complete chain. Miriam made 3 lists. The first contained what they knew. The tags represented workers, deductions had been taken, the same workers appeared across every season, and transfer totals did not match payroll summaries. The second contained what they suspected. Employees had been falsely labeled temporary, pension money had been diverted, and Thomas had approved a reconciliation he should have questioned. The third contained what they needed. Names, pay stubs, employment dates, pension statements, and witnesses who remembered the system. Harold studied the initials scratched behind tag 417. EC may be enough to start. Before they could search, a vehicle stopped beyond the fence. Thomas stepped out alone. He carried none of the patient concern he had worn at the hospital. He crossed the loading yard, saw the open accounting room door, and quickened his pace. What did you do? Harold remained between him and the corridor. We opened a room in our building. Thomas looked past him at the transfer summaries, boiler logs, and sealed tag. For 1 second, His careful expression disappeared. Then it returned. These papers are contaminated. They have no legal value. You could expose yourselves to mold, asbestos, liability. You recognized them quickly, Miriam said. Thomas stopped. She held up the certification bearing his name. You signed this. He called it routine. Hundreds of dormant accounts had been closed using information supplied by the county. He insisted he had no personal knowledge of the laundry workers. Then you will not mind an independent review, Nora said. His attention shifted to her. This is a family matter. No, Miriam replied. You made it one when you used our family to reach this building. Thomas warned that Harold and Miriam were risking their health for records that proved nothing. Then he left without asking them to sell. That frightened Miriam more than another offer would have. After the gate closed, Harold placed the certification beside tag 417. One was a number without a name. The other was a signature claiming no one remained to be paid. Their task was no longer to decide whether the records mattered. It was to find the people Thomas's signature had erased. Nora found Evelyn Carter through an old voter registry. She lived above a closed pharmacy on the south side of town. Miriam climbed the narrow stairs while Harold waited in Nora's car because the cold had sharpened his cough. Evelyn opened the door only as far as the security chain allowed. She was 72, narrow-shouldered, and dressed in a cardigan repaired at both elbows. When Nora explained that they were asking about the municipal steam laundry, Evelyn's expression closed. That place is gone. The building is still there, Miriam said. That is not what I meant. Miriam held up the sealed bag containing the brass tag. The chain came free. Inside, 3 prescription bottles stood beside an envelope marked Final Notice. Evelyn turned it face down before sitting. Miriam placed tag 417 on a clean towel. Evelyn's fingers stopped above it. The blue cloth had faded almost gray, yet she recognized the double stitching along one edge. She had repaired that pocket herself after her work dress tore on a sorting hook. Where did you find this? Inside the return chute. Evelyn touched the initials scratched on the back. EC. My supervisor made us mark the tags because they were always getting mixed up. She had begun at the laundry at 21. Official records showed 18 months of work. Evelyn said she stayed nearly 17 years. 6 mornings a week, she sorted hospital linens before sunrise. During flu seasons, she worked double shifts. In summer, she moved to the pressing floor, where the heat turned the air thick enough to taste. They called us supplemental, she said. That meant they could send us home whenever they wanted. They just never did. Each pay stub listed deductions for tax, insurance, and retirement. Evelyn believed the retirement line meant she was building something she could live on after her hands stopped working. When the laundry closed, the county told her she had never been a permanent employee. Her appeals were rejected because files were incomplete or damaged in an electrical fire. Do you still have the stubs? Miriam asked. Evelyn walked to the bedroom and returned with a cookie tin. Inside were photographs, union notices, and pay envelopes tied with kitchen string. The paper had yellowed, but the deductions remained legible. Ret 4,8. Rit 5,1. Rat 5,35. Small amounts, repeated over years. Miriam compared the dates with photographs of the weekly tag sheets. Number 417 appeared on the same pay periods. The brass tag was no longer only a code. It was Evelyn arriving before daylight, pressing sheets until her wrists swelled, and watching money disappear from every envelope. Nora asked permission to copy the documents. Evelyn agreed on one condition. I go with you. The next morning, Harold met her at the laundry gate. Evelyn stopped beneath the smokestack. I used to dream about the whistle, she said. Even after it shut down, I woke before it should have blown. Inside, she recognized the route from the lockers to the sorting cages. She identified the letters beside tag ranges as work crews, not employers, and explained the cloth colors: blue for sorting, green for pressing, white for hospital sterilization. Miriam corrected her chart. The correction showed the same people moving between departments while remaining labeled temporary. Evelyn studied the opened accounting room and pointed to a narrow shelf above the timestamp. There was a blue book there. What kind of book? Harold asked. Boiler hours and crew counts. The foreman needed to know how many people were inside before he shut the steam down. The shelf was empty. Evelyn thought the book might have been moved near the control panel during the final week. Harold marked the lead on his building map, but did not start tearing through machinery. They already had fragile records requiring care. News of Evelyn's visit traveled quietly. She called a former presser named Ruth, who called a linen driver named Samuel. Within a week, 4 retired workers came to the laundry. One brought pay stubs. Another carried photographs of the same women years apart, though the county had classified them as temporary. Samuel remembered delivering sealed payroll bags to the pension office after the laundry closed. He identified the gray canvas bags Miriam recalled from her payroll days. Not every memory agreed. One worker said deductions stopped before the final year. Another believed the union recovered part of the money. Miriam wrote contradictions beside confirmed facts instead of smoothing them away. "If we hide what does not match," she said, "we become no better than the people who close the files." The visitors brought another need with them. Ruth arrived carrying 2 blankets in a plastic sack. The laundromat near her apartment had raised its prices, and she had been washing small clothes in her sink. Evelyn admitted she did the same. Harold had rebuilt one compact commercial washer disconnected from the main steam system. He replaced the inlet hose, cleaned the pump, and installed a separate shutoff valve. A licensed electrician supplied temporary power after inspecting the circuit. The machine was old, but it worked. They washed Ruth's blankets first. Dark water spun behind the round glass. When the cycle ended, Evelyn and Miriam carried the blankets to an electric dryer donated by Caleb. Warm air entered a building that had been cold for 32 years. More people arrived with records and laundry. Miriam set rules, scheduled loads, no entry beyond marked areas, and every document copied before leaving the owner's hands. Evelyn organized appointments. Ruth brought sandwiches. Samuel repaired a cartwheel. Nora prepared consent forms for testimonies. Harold watched the break-room table collect cups that did not belong to him or Miriam. He had worried that helping others might distract them from the records. Instead, people remembered more when they were not being treated like evidence. While folding a clean sheet, Evelyn recalled that the blue operations book was sometimes hidden behind the pressure board during inspections. Ruth produced a Christmas card signed by 26 employees. In a year, the county claimed only 9 permanent workers remained. Each ordinary object added another stitch. Thomas sent a certified letter demanding that Harold and Miriam stop inviting vulnerable adults into a hazardous structure. He copied the building department and described the gatherings as an unauthorized public operation. Miriam asked Nora which complaints were valid. The answer was uncomfortable. The building could not yet operate as a public laundry. Occupancy, fire exits, and sanitation rules still mattered. They suspended washing for visitors until permits could be reviewed. Harold posted the notice himself. "We will not protect the truth by ignoring safety," he said. The workers continued meeting in the cleared office. They brought payroll envelopes and names of people who had moved away or died. Evelyn began a list of surviving spouses who might still have claims. One evening, she found her own name on Miriam's chart, not 417. Evelyn Carter. Beside it were 17 years of reconstructed shifts and hundreds of deductions the county had treated as if they belonged to no one. "I thought maybe I remembered it wrong," she said. "After enough people tell you a life did not happen the way you lived it, you start checking your own mind." Miriam placed the brass tag beside her name. They counted on that. Outside the office, Harold opened the valve to a newly tested low-pressure heating loop while a licensed inspector watched. The pipe clicked once, then warmed without leaking. Heat moved through the break-room radiator. It was only one room. It was enough. Evelyn removed her repaired cardigan and hung it over a chair. The laundry was no longer simply where Harold and Miriam had gone after losing their home. It was becoming a place where other people could recover the parts of their lives that had never been returned. For the next 10 days, the laundry changed by inches. The public washers remained shut down while Nora worked through permit requirements, but the office and break room were no longer makeshift shelters. Caleb replaced damaged exit hardware. A retired electrician named Leon Park installed a certified panel for the occupied rooms. Volunteers marked safe doors and removed fabric that could feed a fire. Harold approached the heating system in the order he had once taught apprentices: isolate, test, document, then energize. He separated one low-pressure loop from the industrial network, replaced 2 corroded valves, and invited the city's boiler inspector to witness the pressure test. The old radiator in the break room warmed slowly from the bottom upward. No pipes burst, no alarms sounded. The inspector signed a limited approval for heat in the cleared area. Miriam pinned the certificate beside the door. It was a modest victory, but it changed how people entered the building. They no longer stepped inside as though visiting a ruin. They removed their coats and stayed long enough to tell complete stories. Evelyn turned the former supply counter into an intake desk. Each visitor received a numbered folder, but Miriam insisted that the person's full name appear on the front. "We have had enough of people becoming numbers," she said. Nora filed requests with the County Pension Board, Municipal Finance Office, and Archived Records Division. She asked for contribution ledgers, reconciliation reports, account transfers, and correspondence connected to the laundry's closure. The first response arrived in 6 days. Records no longer retained. The second cited water damage. The pension board answered that dormant supplemental accounts had been disposed of according to policy. "They kept the policy," Evelyn said, "but not the people it affected." Miriam placed every denial in a binder. Refusal did not erase the records they possessed. It showed where official memory ended. Their reconstructed list reached 63 names. Some were living, others had died with spouses still receiving reduced benefits. A few could not yet be matched to tag numbers, and Miriam marked them in pencil rather than forcing certainty. Harold returned to the control room with Evelyn's memory of the blue operations book. The pressure board covered most of the north wall. Its gauges had once measured steam sent to washers, presses, dryers, and sterilization lines. Several glass faces were cracked. Evelyn stood at the doorway. "The foreman hid the book when county inspectors came," she said. "Not because the numbers were false, because the crew counts showed more workers than management wanted on paper." Harold examined the mounting bolts. 3 were rusted evenly. The 4th had cleaner threads and a washer installed backward. Someone had removed the panel after the laundry closed. He did not pry it loose immediately. Leon disconnected the remaining electrical feed. Nora photographed the wall. Caleb built a support frame so the heavy board could tilt forward safely. Behind it, they found dust, mouse nests, and a narrow maintenance cavity. At the bottom rested a book wrapped in oilcloth. Its cover had once been blue. Miriam carried it to the office unopened. The binding was brittle. Nora arranged for an archivist from the local historical society to separate the pages and make digital copies. The book contained no account balances. It recorded dates, boiler hours, machine lines in use, and workers assigned to each shift. Initials appeared beside broken belts, hospital emergency loads, weekend overtime, and winter shortages. For 11 consecutive years, the crew count rarely fell below 38. County summaries claimed the laundry maintained 9 permanent workers and hired occasional help during peak months. The Blue Book proved the peaks lasted almost all year. It also recorded tag ranges beside each crew. Number 417 appeared on sorting and pressing shifts across 16 years. Evelyn held a cup while Miriam read the entries aloud. The county had reduced nearly half her working life to 18 months. The book gave those years back one line at a time. Nora cautioned that the records still needed authentication. The handwriting belonged to several foremen, and some names were unknown. They began locating descendants and former supervisors instead of announcing that the case was solved. That restraint impressed Leah Benton, a reporter from the local weekly paper. She came expecting a story about 2 elderly people living in a condemned building. Miriam showed her the approved rooms, inspection certificates, and folders of corroborated records. Harold explained the difference between the inactive industrial boiler and the certified heating loop. Evelyn told Leah that the pension dispute mattered more than the building's purchase price. The article appeared under the headline, "Old Laundry May Hold Names the County Forgot." It accused no one. It described the brass tags, the Blue Book, and former workers searching for records. A photograph showed Harold beneath the pressure board while Miriam and Evelyn sorted documents. By the following afternoon, the office phone rang continuously. Families offered pay stubs, photographs, and death certificates. A church donated folding chairs. The Historical Society lent archival boxes. Leon found apprentices willing to install emergency lighting at cost. Someone painted the common thread on a salvaged board and left it beside the gate. Miriam thought the name too polished for a place with boarded windows. Then Evelyn explained that every uniform had passed through different hands but returned along the same rail. "The work connected us," she said, "even when the records did not." Harold mounted the board above the cleared entrance. The attention also brought resistance. Crosswell Redevelopment issued a statement saying the property remained unsafe and that unverified historical materials should not delay renewal of the district. The pension board warned former workers not to share personal information with unauthorized parties. Thomas told Elaine the story could destroy their family's reputation. Elaine called Miriam. She did not apologize for the house. She asked her mother to stop speaking with reporters until Thomas could review the documents. Why would Thomas review evidence involving his own signature? Miriam asked. He understands the system better than anyone. That may be the problem. Elaine ended the call. Susan arrived after closing, carrying a flash drive and a paper folder. Her hands shook as she placed both on the intake desk. She had accessed the family computer still connected to Elaine's shared email account. Months before Harold entered the hospital, Thomas had exchanged messages with Crosswell's attorney about the steam laundry parcel. One recommended that the building be designated beyond rehabilitation before the tax auction. Another asked whether remaining internal materials would be destroyed during demolition. A third discussed bundling the parcel with neighboring lots once ownership complications were removed. Susan had printed the messages with full headers. "I knew they were discussing redevelopment," she said. "I did not know he was trying to erase the building." Miriam read each page. Susan waited for gratitude or forgiveness. Neither came. "Did you know Elaine was clearing our house before we agreed?" Miriam asked. Susan lowered her eyes. "Yes. Then this helps the case. It does not repair what you allowed." Susan nodded without defending herself. That mattered, though not enough. Nora copied the files and sealed the originals. The messages did not prove Thomas knew what remained inside the laundry, but they proved he wanted the structure gone before Harold and Miriam purchased it. At dusk, a city vehicle stopped outside the gate. An inspector stepped out carrying a clipboard and a notice marked Priority Review. Harold looked at the certified heating loop, the clear exit paths, and the permit still waiting for approval. The laundry had finally become visible. Now everyone who wanted it silent knew where to find it. The city inspector introduced himself as Daniel Ruiz and asked everyone except Harold, Miriam, Nora, and Leon to wait outside. Thomas arrived 10 minutes later with Elaine and a lawyer from Crosswell Redevelopment. Thomas explained that Crosswell had an interest in neighboring parcels and a responsibility to understand any hazard affecting the district. Ruiz replied that property developers did not participate in municipal safety inspections. Thomas stepped back, but he did not leave. Ruiz began with the improvements. The cleared exits met temporary occupancy standards. The new electrical panel had passed inspection. The low-pressure heating loop was properly isolated from the industrial system. Fire extinguishers were mounted, records were organized, and hazardous areas remained blocked. Then he opened the rest of his clipboard. The rear stairwell lacked a compliant handrail. One exit door swung in the wrong direction. The old industrial boiler required permanent fencing, and the office could not legally serve as sleeping quarters without a change of use permit. The laundry operation remained closed until drainage, sanitation, and public access requirements were completed. Thomas listened with the satisfaction of a man hearing a lock turn. "This confirms what we have been saying," he told Elaine. "They cannot stay here safely." Ruiz corrected him. "It confirms that specific violations require correction. It does not transfer ownership or prove incapacity." Nora requested deadlines and appeal procedures. Ruiz granted 30 days for the exit work, 60 for the sleeping area application, and immediate restriction of the industrial floor. Miriam wrote every date beside the corresponding violation. She did not argue that the rules were unfair. She asked what compliance required. When the inspection ended, Thomas placed a purchase agreement on the intake desk. Crosswell would pay enough to cover repairs, legal expenses, and 1 year at a private assisted living residence. Elaine touched the papers as if they were a peace offering. "You could stop fighting," she said. "You could be comfortable." Harold read the first page. The offer required them to surrender all materials found on the property and sign a confidentiality agreement covering the building's prior operations. He slid it back. "This is not an offer for the brick," he said. "It is an offer for what is inside it." Thomas called the clause standard. He said uncontrolled records could expose private employee information and create false claims against innocent people. Evelyn, waiting beyond the marked line, heard him. "False?" she asked. "Were the deductions false when they came out of my pay?" Thomas turned toward her. "I am saying memories and damaged papers can be misinterpreted." Evelyn lifted a copied pay stub. "The amount was clear enough when they took it." Elaine looked from Evelyn to her husband. Until then, Thomas had described the former workers as confused strangers encouraged by Nora and the reporter. Evelyn did not look confused. She looked tired of explaining that her life had happened. Thomas asked Elaine to wait in the car. She did not move. Ruiz posted the restriction notice and left. Nora reminded everyone that the order allowed meetings in the approved office, but no public laundry service, and no sleeping there after 7 days unless temporary residential permission was granted. The deadline created a problem Harold could not solve with patience alone. Their motel money was nearly gone. Susan offered her spare room again. Miriam declined. She would not place Harold in the middle of another daughter's guilt or let temporary shelter become leverage. Caleb found a used office trailer for rent behind the laundry. The owner agreed to a low weekly rate if it remained outside the industrial building. Nora confirmed that zoning allowed it for temporary site supervision, not permanent residence. It was imperfect but legal. They accepted. Harold spent the afternoon measuring the rear stairwell. He insisted he could install the handrail himself. Halfway through marking the wall, a coughing fit bent him against the drill case. The sound drew Miriam from the office. By the time she reached him, he had lowered himself onto a step. His face had lost color. "I am fine," he said after using his inhaler. "No, you are recovering. There is work. There will be work after you are dead, too. That does not mean you must finish it." Harold stared at the unfinished line on the wall. For most of his life, usefulness had meant doing the job with his own hands. Depending on others felt too close to the helplessness his children had assigned him. Miriam sat beside him. "They were wrong to call us incapable," she said. "We do not prove them wrong by pretending we have no limits." The next morning, Harold gave Leon the measurements and supervised from a chair. He corrected the mounting height once, then let the younger volunteers complete the rail. It passed inspection. The smaller victory was harder to accept, but wiser. Susan arrived carrying groceries and a folder of contractor estimates. She had spent 2 days calling licensed firms for the exit door and residential permit work. She did not ask to be praised. Miriam reviewed the estimates. "This helps," she said. Susan nodded. "I know it does not fix anything." "No, it does not." Susan remained to label archival boxes and left before dinner. Trust had not returned, but she had offered labor without demanding relief from her guilt. Elaine came alone that evening. She stood beneath the common thread sign and asked to see the records bearing Thomas's signature. Nora allowed her to view copies with personal details covered. Elaine read the certification, the Crosswell emails, and the confidentiality clause in the purchase offer. "He told me the demolition questions were routine," she said. Miriam closed the binder. "You chose to believe him because believing us would have required you to admit what you did." Elaine flinched. "I thought you were becoming vulnerable." "We were vulnerable. That did not make us yours to manage." Elaine admitted Thomas had first raised concerns about their judgment months before Harold became ill. He said Miriam had begun asking questions about old pension deductions at a family dinner, though Miriam barely remembered mentioning them. After Harold entered the hospital, Thomas warned that stress could make her fixate on financial conspiracies. He had turned her memory into evidence against her before she found anything. Elaine asked whether Miriam believed Thomas had stolen the pension money. "I believe he signed away questions he had a duty to answer," Miriam said. "The investigation will determine the rest." Elaine wanted to apologize. Miriam stopped her. "An apology given because you are frightened of your husband is not yet an apology to us." She told Elaine to return when she was prepared to name her own decisions without hiding behind concern, experts, or Thomas. Elaine left carrying no promise of forgiveness. The following day, the pension board petitioned the county for an emergency review of the laundry records, claiming they contained confidential information and might be improperly handled. At the same time, Crosswell requested enforcement of the demolition designation Thomas had helped prepare before the auction. Two pressures had joined. One threatened the evidence, the other threatened the building holding it. Nora filed for an injunction and requested a public hearing. Miriam moved the original records into archival storage under shared custody with the Historical Society. Copies remained at the laundry. Harold installed locking cabinets in the approved office, but he no longer lifted the steel units himself. By the end of the week, the new exit door opened outward. The handrail held firm. The office trailer stood behind the building with 2 narrow beds and a small table. Steam warmed the break room during daylight hours. At night, Harold and Miriam crossed the yard to the trailer beneath the smokestack. The arrangement was not comfortable. It was theirs. On Friday, Nora received the hearing date. The county would decide whether the laundry could remain occupied, whether Crosswell's demolition request would proceed, and whether the pension records justified an independent review. Thomas had wanted the building quiet. Now he would have to argue for its silence in public. The hearing was moved to the laundry because the county chamber could not hold everyone who wanted to attend. By 9 in the morning, folding chairs filled the cleared pressing floor. The industrial machines remained behind safety barriers, temporary heaters warmed the occupied area, and every exit carried Daniel Ruiz's signed approval. Along the walls, Evelyn and Susan had hung clean work garments donated by former employees. Each carried a paper name tag. Some belonged to people present. Others belonged to workers who had died before anyone admitted their pensions were missing. At the front sat 3 county commissioners, the pension board's attorney, Crosswell's counsel, and an independent hearing officer named Marjorie Bell. Thomas sat beside the attorneys rather than with Elaine. Elaine sat alone in the second row. The first issue was the building. Crosswell argued that the demolition designation should remain because the property posed long-term hazards and interrupted redevelopment. Nora answered with inspection reports, completed repairs, pending permits, and the Historical Society's preservation request. Ruiz testified without favoring either side. Serious hazards remained in restricted areas, he said, but the approved section was being managed responsibly. Demolition was not required for immediate public safety. Crosswell's attorney claimed Harold and Miriam had purchased the laundry without understanding its liabilities. Harold answered, "I understood enough to close the dangerous rooms before anyone entered them. Your consultant wanted the building declared beyond repair without entering it." Nora handed Marjorie the Crosswell emails. The hearing officer allowed them into the record, but warned that motives for demolition did not prove pension misconduct. Miriam welcomed the distinction. "We are not asking one suspicious fact to carry the whole truth," she said. The pension board presented next. Its attorney described the brass tags as laundry property, the blue book as an operations record, and the pay stubs as incomplete personal documents. Together, he argued, they could not prove that every worker qualified for benefits or that withheld money reached the pension system. Thomas was called as the board's former compliance officer. He said he had joined the reconciliation project years after the laundry closed. Senior staff gave him summaries showing that eligible accounts had been resolved. His signature, he explained, certified the process presented to him, not every historical deduction. "Were original worker files available?" Nora asked. "Some were damaged. Others had exceeded retention requirements." "Did you see the notation that supplemental accounts remained unverified?" "I saw many notations." "Did you ask where the withheld deductions went?" "I relied on the finance director's reconciliation." "Did you confirm any workers had been contacted?" "That was not my assigned role. Yet you signed a statement saying no claims remained outstanding." The statement reflected the information supplied. His answers revealed the center of his defense. He had signed because someone else told him the problem was finished. Nora did not call him a thief. She asked why, months before the auction, he had advised Crosswell to seek demolition and asked whether internal materials would be destroyed. Thomas said the question concerned privacy and environmental liability. "Before or after you knew Miriam remembered discrepancies from the laundry payroll?" Thomas looked toward Elaine. Elaine lowered her gaze. After a recess, Miriam carried 3 binders to the front table. She began with tag 417. "This piece of brass does not prove a pension theft," she said. "It proves where we should look." She placed Evelyn's pay stubs beside photographs of the weekly sheets. The dates matched. The deduction marked RET appeared repeatedly. The tag number appeared across the same periods in sorting and pressing crews. Then, Miriam opened the blue book. It recorded crew counts, boiler hours, emergency hospital loads, and weekend shifts. She paired its pages with Harold's fuel calculations and archived delivery invoices from the hospital and Grandwell Hotel. The records told the same story from different directions. The laundry operated year-round. Its volume required far more than 9 permanent workers. The same supposedly temporary tag numbers appeared through every season. Harold explained the machinery plainly. "A boiler does not know what a payroll report says," he told the commissioners. "It records the work demanded from it. Fuel went in, steam went out, machines ran. If only a few people worked here, who moved the loads those machines processed?" Crosswell's attorney suggested mechanical inefficiency could explain excessive fuel. Harold agreed the system wasted energy, then showed maintenance logs recording which lines operated each day. Even at the worst efficiency rate, the output required multiple crews. He did not ask anyone to trust his reputation. He showed the arithmetic. Evelyn testified next. She described her schedule, the deductions, and the rejection of her claim. The pension attorney asked whether she could remember exact dates from decades earlier. "No," she said. "That is why I saved the stubs." Ruth, Samuel, and 6 others followed. Their memories differed on minor details, but their papers showed the same retirement deduction and year-round work. Nora introduced the Christmas photograph signed by 26 workers during a year. The county claimed only 9 permanent employees remained. She added hospital contracts, hotel invoices, and death records for workers whose spouses might still have claims. The chain was not perfect. It was stronger because Miriam never pretended it was. She identified uncertain names, deductions that might have been refunded, and years with missing pages. Then she showed that payroll records documented more withheld money than the pension reconciliation received. The difference had entered a general reserve. Thomas's signature closed the unresolved accounts afterward. Marjorie asked him, "Can you identify any worker contacted before you certified that no claims remained?" Thomas looked down. "No. Can you identify the authority used to move employee deductions into a general reserve?" He consulted counsel, not from memory. At the rear, a former presser began crying quietly. Evelyn reached across 2 chairs and held her hand. Susan then provided the authenticated emails. She explained how she obtained them and admitted she had known her parents opposed the sale of their home but remained silent. "I believed agreeing with the loudest person was the same as keeping peace," she said. It was not. Her confession did not decide the case, but it changed the room. The hearing was also about the ordinary ways people surrendered responsibility. Elaine requested permission to speak. She testified that Thomas had raised doubts about Miriam's judgment before Harold's illness and used those doubts to persuade the family that control was protection. Elaine admitted authorizing the house to be cleared without her parents' consent. Thomas stared at her as if betrayal belonged only to him. After a 40-minute recess, Marjorie denied Crosswell's immediate demolition request and preserved the laundry pending structural review. She referred the pension evidence to an independent forensic audit and the state labor office. The county was ordered to preserve all remaining pension records, and former workers received a formal claims process. She also confirmed that Harold and Miriam's tax sale deed remained valid. No one announced that every stolen dollar had been proven. No one promised quick payment. The victory was narrower and more honest. The evidence could no longer be destroyed, dismissed, or kept outside public review. Before the hearing closed, Miriam asked to read the reconstructed names. Marjorie allowed it. Miriam stood beneath the old overhead rail, while Evelyn passed her the list. She read each person slowly. After every name, someone hung the matching garment or tag along the wall. Thomas left before she finished. Elaine stayed, but Harold did not invite her forward. When the final name was spoken, the room held no applause at first. Only the soft movement of clean fabric in the warmed air. Then Harold reached for Miriam's hand. For weeks, the county had argued over whether the laundry should remain standing. Now everyone could see what it had been holding up. The audit took 7 months. It did not move with the drama of the hearing. It moved through certified letters, payroll tables, archived bank statements, and long afternoons when former workers sat beside Nora while she helped them reconstruct years no official system had preserved. The final report confirmed that retirement deductions had been withheld from more than 100 laundry employees classified as temporary, despite working regular year-round schedules. Some money had been placed in a general reserve. Some had been transferred without individual account numbers. A smaller portion could no longer be traced. Thomas had not designed the original arrangement. It began before he entered the pension office, but the auditors found that he had ignored unresolved balances, approved the closure of accounts without contacting workers, and later used his position with Crosswell to support demolition of the building containing the remaining records. The state opened a professional misconduct case. Crosswell removed him from the redevelopment project. Civil claims followed. Harold read the findings once, folded the summary, and placed it in the archive. He felt no pleasure in Thomas's fall. The report did not return Evelyn's younger hands or restore the years when she had skipped medicine to pay rent. Punishment could acknowledge harm. It could not undo it. The county established an independent restitution fund. Living workers received corrected benefits or settlements. Surviving spouses could file claims. When records remained incomplete, the fund accepted combinations of pay stubs, crew logs, photographs, and sworn testimony rather than demanding one perfect document that no longer existed. Evelyn received her first corrected pension payment on a cold Tuesday morning. She brought the envelope to the laundry unopened. Miriam made coffee. Harold found 3 clean cups. Evelyn sat at the long table and read the amount twice. "It will not make me rich," she said. "It was never supposed to," Miriam answered. "It was supposed to be yours." The house on Alder Street had never been legally sold. Nora forced the listing to be withdrawn, and the family recovered what remained of the furniture sale money. Harold and Miriam were free to return. They visited once. The rooms had been repainted for photographs. The marks showing the children's heights had been covered. The dining room was empty except for pale rectangles where furniture had protected the floor from sunlight. Harold stood where his handmade table had once rested. Miriam walked to the kitchen doorway and touched the smooth paint over Susan's final pencil line. They could have rebuilt the rooms. They could not rebuild the certainty that no one would again decide their future while calling it care. They sold the house themselves several months later. They chose the buyer, read every page, and signed only when they were ready. Part of the money repaired the laundry roof. The rest went into a trust no child could control. David returned the money he had received from selling their belongings. He also found several of Harold's tools at a reseller and bought them back. Harold accepted the toolbox, but did not tell David everything was forgiven. Susan continued working with the claims team. She drove former employees to appointments, organized death certificates, and never asked how long it would take to regain her parents' trust. Elaine came less often. When she did, she no longer began with explanations. She admitted that fear had made control feel responsible, and that convenience had made cruelty easier to ignore. Miriam listened, but she did not erase the boundary between regret and repair. "You may visit," she told Elaine. "You may not manage us." It was the first door Miriam reopened, and she opened it only part way. The steam laundry became the Common Thread Cooperative. The public laundry occupied 2 restored rooms with modern drainage and inspected machines. Older residents and families in crisis could wash clothes without charge. A records clinic helped workers locate missing wages, pensions, and military or union benefits. Leon trained apprentices in electrical repair. Harold taught boiler safety from a chair beside the control board, asking students to listen before touching a wrench. Miriam supervised the records room. No file entered without a full name. No account closed without a documented effort to find its owner. The break room became a community kitchen. The old sorting floor held monthly dinners beneath the overhead rails. Clean shirts, blankets, and work coats moved through the building again, but now nothing left without being matched to the person who had brought it. The cooperative trust prohibited any sale without approval from workers, residents, and an independent elder rights representative. Harold and Miriam had lost one house because others treated ownership as permission to control them. They made certain the next home belonged to a community, not to a single ambitious heir. One winter morning, the first snow settled over the loading yard. Steam clouded the front windows while volunteers prepared breakfast inside. Evelyn hung tag 417 inches, a small frame beside the entrance. Under it, Miriam placed a card bearing Evelyn Carter's full name and 17 years of service. Harold opened the door to a woman standing outside with a sack of laundry and an envelope of old pay stubs pressed beneath her coat. She asked whether this was the place that helped people find what had been taken from them. Miriam looked toward the long table, where one empty chair remained. "Yes," she said. "Come in." Behind her, warm air moved through the building that the county had once planned to erase. The woman stepped across the threshold. Harold closed the door against the snow, but not before another person appeared at the gate.